Welcome to the BFI London Film Festival. We're thrilled to have a screening of The Disciple. The film is an amazing story about one young person's following his guru and journey into finding the true meaning of his art and also exploring his life. I'm very pleased to say that we have with us the director of the film, Chaitanya Tamhane, and welcome, Chaitanya.
Thank you so much.
So I'd like to start, Chaitanya. Obviously, your film Court was a big success. We've had it here at the festival some years ago, and it was a great breakthrough debut feature for you. And it premiered at Venice, for example, amongst many other festivals. Can you tell us a bit about how this film is a kind of a journey on from that early film, and how you kind of came up with the ideas for this particular film?
I mean, Court had a long journey. We were very blessed that it did really well, because really well, compared to what we expected, we had zero expectations. We didn't know what was going to happen, but it had a long journey, and we traveled with it quite a lot, and we also did the Oscar campaign and things like that. And after that, I was curious myself as to what's the next subject or what's the next setting that I'm going to tackle, and what is going to be the next film. And I was working on something else, and suddenly this bug of Indian classical music just bit me. And I don't know how, but I found myself being endlessly fascinated with the music itself, with the stories and the anecdotes that surround this world, and reading books and watching documentaries. So I had to kind of abandon this other script that I was working on. It was a bit like breaking up with someone, because I found myself being very strongly attracted to this beautiful world, very rich, very complex, very nuanced world of Indian classical music and its rich history, and the dynamic subculture that it has in a city like Mumbai. And the deeper I kind of went into that rabbit hole, the more stories and the more characters I kind of uncovered. And from there, the script kind of evolved.
Obviously, you offer a very different image of Mumbai for certainly than any other film I've ever seen from Mumbai. This is a slow kind of meditational space, which is incredible for a city like Mumbai. I guess, what were your ideas around transforming that, taking the music and the story that you were developing into that landscape? I mean, Mumbai is another character in the film, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that Mumbai is a very important character in the film. And because this film jumps across 4 different time periods, 2006, the early 90s, 2018, and then 2022, the city also had to change in how we depict it. And just like for everybody else who lives in the city, it plays an important role and influences the psyche of the main character, which is Sharad. So it required a lot of research. It required a lot of thought and planning on a design level as to which aspects or which facets of the city do we want to show in which period. Because I have grown up in the 90s, so there was also some amount of nostalgia and memory attached. And I come from, a very typical Marathi household. So to capture the nuances of that world, which was fairly kind of insular and untouched, and as time has progressed, Mumbai has become increasingly more cosmopolitan, also more, I would say, frantic and capitalistic. So yes, just like the character, I think the city also changes through the film. And just for me personally, I find the city to be endlessly fascinating. Every time I'm out for a drive in the city, I am surprised by its little nooks and corners. Every time I'm taking a stroll down the street, I come across a new story. So yeah, I think that kind of reflects in the film.
Unlike, for example, the film Whiplash, which has a kind of similar idea in terms of this is a very different story and a very different approach. It's a very Indian story in many ways. Can you tell us a bit about your how much this is based on a true story, and how you develop the characters, the plot, etc.?
So I'd written a play when I was about 21 called Grey Elephants in Denmark, which was set in the world of magic and mentalism. I would say The Disciple is like a spiritual adaptation, a successor of Grey Elephants in Denmark, where the core ethos, the core conflict was the same, which is of an artist who is not good enough in some ways. And then they also realize that fact, and yet they have to adapt to the world and to life that constantly keeps happening. But beyond that, I think the characters and the plot kind of emerges from the research, emerges from real life, because I traveled across the country and interviewed a lot of musicians. I attended all kinds of concerts and just developed genuine relationships with a lot of musicians to understand their inner worlds better. And I that's where the characters and the plot kind of emerged from.
But it's a very fascinating relationship between the guru and the disciple as well. That whole playing out, and how he's never good enough. As you say, he's never good enough. But it's also about how he constantly pursues that at the cost of his own health, I suppose. Well, in livelihood anyway, in terms of his a normal standard life, relationships, etc.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is one of the prerequisites to learning Indian classical music, I would say, for anybody who's serious, is the complete submission of yourself to your guru. And also faith, I think, is a key operative for these practitioners, because the idea is, if you keep practicing, if you keep giving and putting in enough into your art and your craft, there will be a result, or there will be a reward at the end of it. I mean, of course, there's also a philosophical, spiritual side to it, which says that it's a lifelong process, it's a way of life, but which is also an increasingly difficult philosophy to put into practice in a increasingly, contemporary, fast-paced, materialistic world that Sharad finds himself in. And yet he's been raised on some very traditional core values by his father, and he's been taught to respect his elders and to completely submit to his mentors. And I have seen those kind of relationships between real musicians and and their gurus. And yet I also found those relationships becoming more and more commercial in, say, 2020, where it is about money, where it is about a certain kind of a transaction. Whereas in the older days, the idea was, you live with the guru, you serve the guru in his or her house, and you do their household chores, and you take care of them. And you're not only learning when they're teaching you, but you're also learning their way of life. You're also learning their worldview. You're also learning from them when they are practicing their own music, just by listening to it. And of course, it's impractical for somebody to live in their guru's house now in a city like Mumbai, but there are still remnants of those values that you will find in this culture. So it was very fascinating for me to explore that relationship, because it's a relationship of mutual dependency in a way. If you see, the guru is also dependent on the disciple in many ways, and of course the disciple is dependent on the guru, not just with regards to the music, but also his career, his stability, and his outlook towards life. And how that relationship changes over the years was something very fascinating for me to explore.
You've told us about the how the different periods of Mumbai, but could you just tell us a bit about how the cinematography is sumptuous throughout the film? Just tell us how you created that kind of atmosphere through the cinematography, obviously, as well, and about that process.
Thank you for saying that. It basically involved collaborating very closely with the production designer and the cinematographer and the research team that collected, visual documentation of how the city looked. Also, the changes between, say, 2006 and 2018 are very subtle, as opposed to, say, early 90s and 2020. So we had to kind of work on that gradation, work on certain very nuanced elements of how the city has changed. in terms of the architecture, in terms of the signage, in terms of even the costumes, and yes, of course, we kind of tried to reflect that with the cinematography. We shot on two different sets of lenses. The first chapter is shot with old school anamorphic lenses, and the second chapter has been shot with more like modern, Zeiss master primes. But also, you see, what we've done is that the first chapter is more, I would say, romantic and full of promise and color, and in the second chapter things start becoming sharper, but also the colors kind of start getting sucked out a little bit. And that is also to not just render a more objective portrait of the city, but to see it in a subjective way as the character experiences it. The streets at night are deserted and empty and just for him. And in the second chapter you see that the sun is glaring into his eyes, and there's traffic and there's noise. And so again, I mean, maybe there was always traffic in the city, but it's how the character also experiences the city and his relationship with the city. So yes, we tried in many different ways to make that happen.
You're stated, quoted as working on Cuarón's Roma, for example. And this is a very different film. It's shot very differently. The story is very different. But I wondered what kind of experience or influences you found that you may or reflect that you carried into this film. It's not obvious, but I'm just wondering if there was an intriguing some connections.
Right.
Some way.
I mean, Alfonso is a master who's in complete control of the medium. So I kind of learned that rigor, and I was inspired by his discipline and his vision. Seeing him at work, during the post-production or during the filming, I felt has expanded my vocabulary of filmmaking. It's made me more fearless. I used to think that, I'm very sort of particular and meticulous about details. But when I saw him at work, I was like, okay, I have a long way to go still. And yeah, it just made me more sensitive to the image, to sound design, to many, many different aspects. And it was not just interacting with him, it was also interacting with his collaborators on the film, who also I feel like taught me a lot. And then also in very tangible terms, in very direct terms, Alfonso has had a lot of input on the edit, on the script level, and even, for example, choosing the cinematographer. And his help has been a source of ongoing support and inspiration for us in that sense.
Great. Could you just let us know a bit about the process of choosing the actors? I mean, you've got a great ensemble cast there. How you came about these actors and how you did you workshop them into the film, or how did that process take place?
Well, I must say that the casting was the most difficult process in making the film, after, I guess, writing the script. Because most people who read the script, they said, how are you going to cast for this film? This film cannot be cast. Because there were so many restrictions we were working with. They had to be able to speak Marathi. They had to be musicians. It would be very difficult for a non-musician in the form that I use, which is long, continuous takes and wide shots, to be able to fake this music, which is very complex and complicated. And then they had to have a certain screen presence. They had to fit, their looks had to fit the character descriptions, and they had to be interested, and they had to be the right age group. And especially, say, for somebody like Sharad, there's also a physical transformation that the character goes through. And they had to be able to act after all of this. So we were basically, at a wit's end and banging our heads on the wall as to how do we find the cast for this film. It involved a very dedicated casting team, conducting auditions with literally every musician in the state of Maharashtra for about 10 or 11 months. And even then, taking a leap of faith and choosing your cast after lots of workshopping and lots of rounds of auditions, and also for these professionals who are professional musicians, they had to take a leap of faith in trusting us, the makers of the film, that we will be doing something worth their time, and that they will be in safe hands when they put themselves out there in front of the camera.
So what kind of director are you in terms of working with actors? Do you workshop with them, or you just expect them to, do you put them in the situation and then they have to perform?
Right. No, I think our entire sort of production plan is geared towards ensuring good performances and ensuring towards creating an atmosphere where the actors feel very, very safe. I don't think I would say that I workshop a lot, but yes, I do practice the scenes with them. But more than that, it's about forming a rapport with them. It's about, forming a relationship with them and communicating what you have in mind, your vision to them, your vision and your interpretation of the characters to them. And then on set, giving them enough time to fail and to experiment and to stumble, and then eventually, you know, get to a place where we are all happy with the scene, which is why we shot only one scene a day, just so that we could get the perform, because they are delivering scripted lines. They are not improvising. They are delivering the exact lines that I have written. And it was the first time they were doing this. They were acting for the first time, in their lives. So it was a challenge for them. And even the music, the performances, they were doing playback, which they had never done. They are used to being in the moment and performing. Here they had to kind of rely on rote memory and lip sync to what they had already recorded in the studio, which was a very new experience for them. But I think eventually we somehow managed.
I would imagine you. So I just wanted to find out a bit of the editing process. I'd imagine quite a lot of this film may have taken place. The formulation may have taken place in the edit. How close to the original script was the film, and how much did you kind of develop in the editing process with the footage you actually ended up with?
Right. I mean, I think it's pretty close to the script in terms of its structure and the scenes. I think I hardly, maybe like a couple of shots, not even a scene that got deleted from the script. It was more of the structure was all there. It was more about finding the right pacing and the right transitions in the edit. I mean, I am very meticulous, and also like choosing the right take for the performances, because I would shoot many takes with the actors. So it was about shaping the performances of the actors through the edit and making sure that the pacing reflects the tension in the narrative, and then finding the right transitions, because we also work very closely with the sound design team when we are working on the edit, because for me they are two sides of the same coin in a way.
And finally, about the music. I mean, the music is stunning. It carries the film. I'd imagine it. You had to. The pacing is everything to do with the music and the cinematography working together. So, just tell us a bit about your development of the music, your choices on the music.
Right. So I collaborated with a very accomplished tabla maestro and writer, historian, Dr. Anish Pradhan, who has designed the music. I mean, most of the music in the film is like traditional ragas from Indian classical music, but they had to be tailored for the medium of cinema and for whatever the narrative sequences in the script demanded. And so we had to play a lot with time, where we don't kind of shortchange the experience of you being in on like watching a concert, for example, because Indian classical music needs time. It's very meditative and can be very slow paced, and it unfolds say over an hour and a half, even a single raga. So to compress time without the viewers realizing that was one big challenge. Also, we had to make sure that apart from the individual pieces working as a single unit, they also had to shape the broader the larger soundscape and the narrative scape of the film. So we had to make sure how that they are working together as a whole as the story progresses. And yes, we had to play to the strengths of the musicians, because they are all trained musicians and they've been doing this all their lives. But they also had to kind of keep in mind what the characters are going through in the film, because the music is reflecting their psychological state of mind, which is literally what khayal music translates to. Khayal means a state of mind, and that's kind of also the idea of the music in the film. So it was a very fun, very, I would say, challenging at times, but a very rewarding process.
Thank you very much, Chaitanya. Thanks for being with
Thank you,
us, and
Cary.
every success with the film.
Thank you so much, Cary.